we're gonna show you how to take your studio from looking like this to something like this. But before that, we gotta go back a few days. The reason we decided to create a slat wall for our studio is we wanted to make something that was another usable set space in our studio space. We already have a couple sets that we use. One's a lifestyle corner, and we have some other options, especially using seamless paper rolls. This little corner behind me just hasn't been very usable. One of the problems we have is we have a bunch of seamless paper rolls just laying on the floor. Unfortunately, we have drop ceiling in here, which is at about 8.5 feet tall. And so that means a 9-foot paper roll can't stand up. A lot of studios will create a little box and have all their paper rolls just standing straight up, and we don't have that ability here. And so what we've decided to do is we're gonna build a wall that's flush with that soffit, and that's gonna give us about 14 inches behind there. We're gonna create some shelves so that we can put those paper rolls, hide them away, and we can also have this really cool slat feature wall that will look great for filming on. So let's start by talking about the design and construction process for this project. We wanted to make a 12-foot wide wall. The best way for us to do that was to break it up into 3 4-foot wide sections. So we used 2x4s and made framing that went just up to that soffit edge. Those needed to be a little less than 8 feet because the soffit drops down a little bit. But the main thing we needed to figure out is how to make that precisely the right height. But on top of that, we wanted to make sure that it needed to be exactly 4 foot wide because we were going to put on drywall sheets. Something important to note is this is not a structural wall. We actually rent this space, and so we want to make sure that the floor doesn't get ruined. And so one of the things that we did is we bought some felt pads like you would put under furniture, and we attached those to the bottom of the base 2x4s. That way it could slide on top of this laminate flooring and not destroy it. So once all those frames were in place, the next thing we needed to do was add our shelves, which essentially were short pieces of 2x4 that were flat at 3 different heights along the path. We used angle brackets to secure those to the wall with drywall screws and then secure it to the framing as well. But we also used a level to make sure that we were keeping the wall level all the time. So we cut each piece to make sure that it kept the wall pushed out to the right position. Once we had all the framing and shelves up, what we wanted to do was test our 9-foot paper rolls on it. On the front of the framing, we then had to decide what material we would use to be the backing of the wood slats. There were multiple options. We thought about getting 4-foot by 8-foot sheets of MDF, getting 4-foot by 8-foot sheets of plywood, and then getting drywall. Now, because this ceiling is actually at 8 foot 5 inches instead of a typical 8-foot height, we needed to figure out something that would look better. If we had done the MDF or the plywood, we would have had to get an extra strip of board to go up to make it flush on top of those boards, a 5-inch thick board. That would have been a pain, so we ended up going with an easier, more affordable method, which is drywall. We used drywall screws to anchor in each of those drywall sheets, and then once all those were up, the next step was going to be painting. We used primer first because when you have untreated drywall, you first need to put primer on it so that the paint doesn't soak in. We chose a flat finish paint called Dark Secret from Home Depot, almost charcoal or chalk wall feel to it. The next was the most important part of the wall, the wood slats. When we were trying to figure out what wood to get, we ended up choosing select pine boards from Home Depot, and we got 1x2 boards. That meant we needed to divide the wall up by 1.5 inches and kind of figure out the gaps based on that. One of the things we did to save time and money and a huge mess is we didn't use the mud on the drywall to actually get rid of those creases between the actual drywall boards. Because of that, we didn't want those to be visible at all. And then we perfectly lined up the center of 2 boards over those seams. Then what we had to do, we had to take the measurement between the wood slats. We had 15 wood slats that we would be putting in there. but we would also have 16 gaps within that space that needed to be there. Once we figured that out, it ended up being just under 1.5 inches. It was 1.45 inches, I believe. And so what we did is we measured roughly 1.45 inches on a scrap piece of 2x4 and cut 2 blocks to that width. Another thing that we thought through that we wanted to be sure to keep is we wanted to make sure that at the bottom where we would be putting baseboard, that it was exactly level at 5 inches. And so we took our 4-foot long level, we measured how thick that was, and then we needed to get the remainder to make it up to 5 inches. And again, we cut little 2x4 blocks, set the level on top of those 2x4 blocks. So as we went along, each slat would sit on that level, and then it would have those little 2x4 spacers so that we could really just fly through putting those up. For ease and best look, we ended up using brad nailer to put these slats up. We ended up choosing 2-inch brads to make sure that it had plenty of distance to stick in through the slat and then into the drywall. And if there's 2x4s behind it, hopefully into that 2x4 as well. I do want to talk about a few challenges and or mistakes that we made along the way and some things that you should consider when you're building your wall. We created 2 blocks, which we would put one at the bottom and one near the top. And then once those were in place, I started by putting a brad right in the middle of the board. And after we did a full section, the first section actually went almost perfectly, but the second section we got to the last slat and the gap was off. Some of those boards bent a little inward or outward in the center. What we started implementing later is we would hold those 2 blocks, like I said, at the top and the bottom. We would put a brad in at the block at the top, at the block at the bottom, and then slide one of those blocks into the middle to make sure that that gap was good too. The second challenge we had was using brads going into drywall. A lot of the boards are flush to the wall. Obviously, if you pull on each of those boards, you could pull them right off the wall, but it wasn't as important to have everything perfect because we just needed to get it done. The longer we spent on it, the more money we lost from not being able to work on client projects. The time to build this project was probably roughly 2 8-hour days. And so that was 2 people working on it, but you're gonna need to take some time to make it look really good. And one of the things that gives you a delay is obviously painting. Here's the materials we bought. We got 3 12-foot 1/2-inch thick drywall boards, 12 8-foot long kiln dried 2x4 boards, 49 select pine 1x2s that we used as the wood slats, 1 gallon of Kilz primer, 1 gallon of black paint, 3 sets of felt pads, 18 angle brackets, 2 paint trays, 1 box of 1.5-inch drywall screws, 20 feet of molding, and for us, just over $20 to rent a truck from Home Depot to deliver all the supplies. So our final cost was just about $750. But we ended up choosing the Select Pine instead of one of the cheaper like common boards that you can get from Home Depot. We ended up deciding that we wanted to have a brighter, more natural wood feel instead of staining it. At one point we thought about doing more of a walnut stain, but we figured it would be too dark. And so these look incredible even without a stain or any treatment on it. But that was just over $7.50 per board versus probably $3 to $4 per board. One of the things that number doesn't quite show you though, is we had a lot of the tools or were able to borrow a few tools. So you're probably looking at least another $100 if you're gonna be renting any other equipment, or if you're gonna need to buy all the screws, drywall anchors, hardware, those kind of things on top of it. I'm stoked with how this slat wall came out and what it's gonna mean for our studio. If you wanna learn more about our studio space and what we've done to help create it and make it better for our clients, make sure you check out this next video. See you next time.